What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Lighting the Lamp podcast. I am here with Tim.
Your host with kind of the most.
And this episode, we're going to be talking various stuff about round two. Again, just to put it out there, this is being recorded around 6 o'clock on the day of the 9th. So any information that seems outdated, that's why. Like, obviously, the Bruins have Game 6 in about an hour and a half. So when we talk about that series, that information could all potentially just go right out the window. But that's just kind of the nature of doing this kind of stuff. So again, just ignore any information that's not relevant anymore. But before we even talk about the round two series, I just kind of wanted to acknowledge something that happened recently that was pretty monumental. Taya Curry, a 16-year-old goaltender, becomes the first woman ever to be drafted in OHL history. She went to the Sarnia Sting, I think, in one of the later rounds. I think maybe like the 12th round or something along those lines. But, it's definitely cool to see. It's a pretty monumental step forward in our sport for something like this to happen. And I don't really think there needs to be much more said other than that a lot of people, us included and everyone here on this podcast, are going to be rooting for her. And I hope that she has a very successful OHL career. And honestly, maybe one day she makes it to the show. Who knows?
It'd be crazy even if she just made it out of the OHL. She makes it to a higher league than there. That's crazy. Even if she gets a starting position in the OHL, it'd be crazy.
Yeah, she was drafted pretty late, so I assume that she's going to either be backing or third stringing for a while on the Sting. I'm not really entirely familiar with their goaltender situation, so I honestly couldn't tell you, but I do know that she has an uphill battle ahead of her, obviously, just not even just being the first woman in the OHL, but all the pressures and whatnot that come with that. Also, the fact that, she's a little bit on the shorter side for goaltenders just in general, being 5'7", 143. I think you and I looked it up the other day, and the shortest active goalies in the NHL are 5'10", which I think is... Or Hudobin might be like 5'10". I think he's one of the shorter ones in the show. But, she has an uphill battle ahead of her, and I just hope that she realizes that there's going to be a lot more people rooting for her than against her. Because, let's not beat around the bush. Like, she's going to get a lot of hate. She's going to get a lot of ignorant comments. She's going to get a lot of pressure put on her from stupid people that are going to use her as a barometer for all of women's hockey. So,
from what a quick Google search says, the shortest goalie in the NHL is that 6 foot Casey DeSmith. That's
first
currently
link's
in the NHL.
That link's inaccurate, though.
Yeah,
because I saw the same one when I looked it up, and I was like, "There's no way."
Yeah, I was a little.
I don't know why it's the first one that comes up on Google, but it's wrong.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that either Saros or Hudobin is only like 5'10", 5'11", something along those lines.
Saros, Khudobin, and Halak are all 5'11".
Yeah, so she's a little bit undersized, but we have seen undersized goalies perform well in the NHL before. Obviously. More back in the day, we had more undersized goalies along the lines of guys like Darren Pang, but
Mike Vernon was 5'9".
Yeah, and Vernon had a really, really good career. Darren Pang obviously had a fantastic career as well. So, I just hope that she's ready to face the stupidity that's going to come out, because there's going to be the idiots, the knuckleheads, the old heads, the stupid bro sports guys that are going to say this, that, and the other thing about her. But she has a lot more supporters than I think she's going to realize, me included. And I really do wish her nothing but the best. And I'm sure that, I speak for pretty much everyone on the podcast. And most of our viewers, I would hope, would do nothing but support her going forward. So little bit of hockey history being made, pretty cool. So we'll keep an eye on Taya Curry and her path to potentially in the NHL one day. So we will move on from that, and we will talk about the round 2 series. And just so you guys know, I know that awards and stuff, finalists for awards are getting announced during the NHL playoffs, but we're going to save all of that for its own episode because I don't want to piecemeal it together and say, well, we talked about all these awards before, but now it's time for the award show. I just kind of want to keep it all together. So we are keeping track of, people that are getting nominated, such and such, but that will be at a later date. So let's talk about round 2, and I guess we'll just start talking about the 2 series that are over, and we'll start with Montreal and the Winnipeg Jets. Montreal sweeping the Winnipeg Jets in 4 games. Montreal will end up facing the winner of Vegas and the Avalanche series. So, I guess initial reaction to the series, how did you feel watching this series? Do you think we've either underestimated the Canadiens? And I guess the ultimate question is, since obviously all these games are in division, how are the Canadiens going to fare when they have to play their first out-of-division opponent of the year in either one of the Vegas Golden Knights or the Colorado Avalanche?
The fact that I've been rooting big time for both of these teams, as you know. So I'm honestly just really disappointed in how the series turned out, going only 4 games, despite the fact that some of the games were close, and the fact that, I have it right here. Game 1 was 5-3, but it was a close game. Game 2 was 1-0, and then Game 3 was a blowout. Game 4 was 2-3. So the Jets put up a fight, but it didn't look really like they were doing all that much out there. They looked So maybe this gives the Montreal Canadiens the heat to keep going. Maybe this is their kindling to the fire that they need to win this. Maybe they'll be able to beat the Avalanche or Knights. I don't know, but the Knights look like they might win the series at this point, and I think they have a better shot against the Knights than MacDog.
I gotta be honest with you, I'm man enough to admit when I was wrong and I severely underestimated the Canadiens, basically right from the start of the season. But I'm still not buying the team as true contenders beyond this round. I'm just not, because honestly, the Canadian division, let's be honest here, sucked. It's no secret that the division wasn't great. And me and you and even Steve have talked about at length that we don't really consider any of the teams from this division true contenders. So, I'm going to be honest with you here. The fact that, you beat the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is impressive to me. You sweep out the Winnipeg Jets, but I still think most of the other teams left in the playoffs are still better than Montreal Canadiens. Honestly, because they've been in the bubble the whole time playing with only the other Canadian teams, people tend to forget that fact, and I think it's important. Do I think they could potentially beat the Vegas Golden Knights? I think so. They have a chance for sure. Do they have any semblance of a shot against a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning? There's not a snowball's chance in hell that they would be able to beat the Lightning, in my opinion. Not even close, honestly. And that's not to take anything away from what they've done. The fact that they've been able to get out of the division is impressive, but this is where we really separate the teams that are pretenders from contenders, where you have to play teams that aren't in your division, and specifically that aren't in a division that was as weak as the North was this year. But hey, honestly, everyone doubting them has worked really well for them so far, so maybe that's just what they need, is for people like me to just not believe in them. Honestly, the only person on this team, though, that kind of scares me is Carey Price, because what gets lost in this series is just how good he was. Because those 2 blowout games, everyone's like, Montreal's offense just woke up, but Carey Price is really honestly the reason that this was a 4-game series, in my opinion.
And I think him having a couple rough goals going on him is only the best thing for him, because he's the type of player who we've seen he gets scored on once, and the rest of the game he's lights out. And so the way that I see it, him letting in a couple of those weak ones on his glove side and over his shoulders only is going to fuel the fire in his practice and in his work to work on that.
I mean, if we pull up his stats here, if the Canadiens website ever wants to load, a 1.97 and a 9.35 through 11 games. Considering the two teams he played against were more offensively geared teams, is ridiculous. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Those are absolutely astronomical stats. I get the reason I just don't buy the team is just because they're just missing that real X factor not named Carey Price, and I think that's the issue we've seen with these Montreal teams in the past. Even when they were in early competitive years, like in 2014 and around those times, the story and the tale of the tape was that Carey Price is good enough to get them almost to the finish line, but they need that one extra push. They need that little oomph up front, and Suzuki and Caulfield have been really good, but if you ask me if they're game breakers, I wouldn't say that they are just yet. And, unfortunately, the real barometer that you have to face these teams up against is the Tampa Bay Lightning, which, I mean, almost no team stacks up against them. But I just look at the roster, and I'm still seeing missing pieces.
I could see them making the cup, though, because I think that the tough team... honestly... even if this team played the Islanders, I could see them losing. If this team plays the Lightning, I could see them losing. If they played the Hurricanes, I could see them losing, because those teams are not just offensively presence teams. Whereas I think the Knights thrive off their forecheck and their offensive pressure and just neutral zone pressure, and the Avalanche are obviously just an offensive zone team. Like, the whole team is based around their offensive zone presence, even down to the defensive core. So I think that I could easily see them making the run to it. But like you said, I don't really see them beating the beating the Lightning, or let's say the Islanders if they make it, which I'm not sure if they will. Or even they could beat the Bruins. I could see them beating the Bruins, because I think I think the top line of the Bruins and the top line of the Canadiens would just come to a shootout, essentially, of which line's going to be the one that scores and stuff.
The Bruins.
And
but not to put anything against the difference first
being
line,
the difference being
it's honestly not even close.
But the difference there being Carey Price over Rask.
Rask has been really good too, though. I mean, he's been banged up, but his stats are crazy. And honestly, the goals he's letting in against the Islanders, a lot of them really aren't even his fault. I mean,
I'd agree with that.
Like, you look at that last game, and the Palmieri goal took a bounce off of two defensemen's skates. The Barzell goal, I mean, he'd probably want that back because it's a short side goal from the circles. But, the other goal in that game came off of just a rebound. I
just don't think it would be out of the realm for them to beat the Bruins, whereas I think they're clearly not beating the Lightning.
No. And again, I don't want to take anything away from the Canadiens, because honestly, I would actually like to see this team win a Stanley Cup, just because Carey Price...
Minus you, Shea Weber, you're a bum.
Besides Shea Weber, I really like the rest of this team. Like, Carey Price absolutely deserves this run. It would be awesome to see Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield come in and make the impact that they have on this run at such a young age. Guys like Kotkaniemi, it would be great to see. Again, at such a young age, making such a huge impact, but I just don't think it's going to happen. But hey, like I said, people doubting them has been their fuel so far, and if that's what it takes for them to do it, then good on them. So, I do want to talk about the other side of this series, though. And I think really, what happened to the Jets is pretty obvious. And it's not just Scheifele getting suspended, but let's not beat around the bush. That's not easy to overcome, because not only is it a first-line player, it's your best player, and it's your first-line center. You can overcome a winger going out way easier than you can a center. And we're even seeing it with the Avalanche struggling in that second-line center position since Kadri went and got himself suspended. So, I just didn't like the way that the Jets looked, honestly. Not even just without the Scheifele impact on the ice, but the passes just weren't very crisp. It kind of looked like they were out of sync, and maybe that's just because the lines had to get shuffled without Scheifele, so you'll get a couple new line combos, but they just didn't look crisp. There wasn't a lot of pretty plays they were making. They didn't look very clean coming out of the zone. They just looked, for lack of a better word, discombobulated, honestly. They just looked like they were on separate pages of the book. You know what I'm saying? And I guess my question at this point would be, what do you do this offseason if you're the Winnipeg Jets? What steps should you be taking to try to rectify this situation? Because you do have Connor Hellebuyck under contract, but he's also just now turning 28. So now we have to start considering the possibility that if things don't get better in Winnipeg, might he start looking elsewhere? Might he start asking for a trade? These are things we have to start considering now because, let's be honest here, the Jets haven't made it past the second round ever. So
I think you need to... Where do you start? I don't even know. Is it coaching that's the issue? Is that why it fell apart? Is it really the fact that Scheifele was the team and Blake Wheeler was just kind of lard-assing his way around through the series? Was it... Do you have to... Well, they definitely need to depth in their D-core, I think. I think we saw the D-line really they got an ego, I think, from playing the Edmonton Oilers and shutting down McDavid and all that. And I think the wake-up call was the Canadiens. I don't even know if they're necessarily deeper than the Oilers, honestly, but their depth has been playing better than the Oilers did.
I mean, are you talking about defensive or offensive?
Offensively.
There's no question, I think, that the Jets are deeper than the Oilers, just on the basis of
I meant the Canadiens are deeper than the Oilers.
Oh.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, actually, no. I think the Canadiens it's a pretty, because the Canadiens are all depth, really,
Yeah, but I'm saying that, it's not like their depth is crazy or anything. It just, the depth just showed up to play on the Canadiens, where it didn't show up to play on the Oilers, clearly. Because
I'm kind of lost. Why are we talking about the Canadiens?
Because they just swept the Jets, so I'm comparing them to the Oilers.
Okay, I was okay. I kind of got lost. I was like, wait, why are we talking about the Oilers now?
I'm comparing the opponents of the Jets.
Okay, I see. Okay, sorry. I just
So
my brain just turned off for a second.
You're good. But yeah, so I think that the D-core just ran into better offensive depth opponents. And while they were clearly able to do it in Edmonton, they couldn't shut down the top line on the Canadiens from mismatching, really. So that's why I'm wondering if it's a coaching issue.
Honestly, going into the offseason, I think the number one thing that this team needs to really consider is really going out and paying a legitimate top two defenseman, because I like a lot of their young guys. I think Josh Morrissey's a great defenseman. Neil Pionk has really, really stepped up. Ville Heinola, Logan Stanley had a really good series despite the sweep. I thought Logan Stanley played fantastically, but the problem is right now this team has a lot of what I would consider top four defensemen. Honestly, Morrissey, DeMello. I'm going to put Neil Pionk as borderline top two. He's not really solidified there just yet. And then you have guys
think with a partner, he's top two. With a good or excellent partner, he's top two.
Yeah, that's, he's not good enough to just be a solo top two guy.
He's kind of like how Mark Stahl was earlier in his career, where he needed that Dan Girardi or that later on Ryan McDonough.
Yeah.
But he was always still solid or excellent.
Yeah, Derek Forbert, Ville Heinola, Logan Stanley, Tucker Poolman, Sami Niku, none of these guys are bad, and you want to give the youth the playing time in order to develop, but I think you need to make a hard decision on one of these players and move them out for a legitimate top 2 defenseman. Because let's say, for example, these guys go after Seth Jones, right? And your top line is you have Jones and Pionk, although they'd probably split those up because Jones is a right D. But let's just say, for argument's sake, Jones plays with Josh Morrissey, right? So you got Jones, Morrissey, then you get DeMello, Pionk, and then you run with Heinola and Logan Stanley. I mean, I think that's a legitimately solid defensive core right there. You got a good mix of offensive players, good mix of shutdown defensive players, and we know that the offense is good enough. I mean, the top 6 is one of the best in the league. They do need to get more out of PLD. I mean, that's, he didn't disappoint, but he definitely didn't live up to the hype that he bought.
And Blake Wheeler needed to do more. He was, I don't want to say invisible, but I wasn't seeing much of Blake Wheeler's offensive capabilities in this series.
No, and the Jets have some pretty good depth. Like, I love guys like Adam Lowry and Andrew Kopp. I think they're fantastic depth pieces, but I just think getting that legitimate cornerstone top 2 defenseman to round out the core at that point would really just lock everyone into place and make this team a lot more formidable. Just because, the unfortunate reality is, while you do want to give the young guys time to develop, it's kind of starting. It's time for this team to start competing.
You need to accelerate their development with someone to guide them through it. Honestly, there's the oldest guy on this team on their defensive core is
Jordy
Ben, and he's not even that. I don't want to say he's not that experienced, but he's not an experienced elite defenseman. If they brought in someone to essentially swing the young guys around.
Yeah, and Blake Wheeler's also 34, so he's starting to get up there in his career. I mean, the good thing for this team is the rest of the team is relatively young. Scheifele is only 28. Kyle Connor's 24. Ehlers is 25. PLD is 22. But, like we discussed, Hellebuck is 28. Scheifele's 34. Scheifele's 28. Wheeler's 34. These are starting to be the years where this team needs to start putting it together. I think another thing that they could do this year is go out and sign a different second-line center. No offense to Paul Stastny. I think he played great, but he's also 35. So
he was one of the better players, too, actually.
Yeah, you just need that, and obviously PLD can play center, but you need that legitimate second-line center, because I think we were starting to see in the rest of the league, too, that's such an important position. And no offense to Paul Stastny, but he was really only brought back because of his chemistry with Patrick Laine, and I think they need a speedier second line center to keep up with guys like Nikolai Ehlers. So honestly, I think the Jets have a very clear path ahead to contendership. A cornerstone defenseman and maybe a second line center. The rest of this team is pretty solid, all considered. I think I like the direction that this team is going. So. A disappointing end to the year for the Winnipeg Jets, but the future is bright in Winnipeg. So we will move on from them, and we'll talk about the other series that ended last night. The Tampa Bay Lightning take out the Carolina Hurricanes in 5 games, posting a shutout last night 2-0 on the road. And, it's another year where we're sitting there looking at the Hurricanes saying, why can't they just get over this hump? Why can't they just, 2 years ago in 2019, they made the Eastern Conference Finals. I'm not going to say they walked to the Eastern Conference Finals, but I do think that there was a very, very real thing that happened with the New York Islanders, which I think is a similar situation that happened with the Jets, where they're not, the Islanders aren't a young team, but a relatively playoff inexperienced team gets a sweep over a huge rival. They're coming off this emotional high, and then they sit for a week and a half. And your opponent is coming off a 7-game series, an emotional 7-game series. They're locked in. Games 1 and 2 don't go their way because their opponent's locked in, and then the series just slips away from there. So, I don't want to say that Hurricanes walked to the finals in 2019, but they got slapped by the Bruins, and it really wasn't even close, to be honest. Last year in the bubble, they also lost to the Boston Bruins. This year, second round, can't get past the Lightning. They lose in 5 games. Why is it that this team every year are we sitting here saying the same thing? The roster's so good. I don't get it. Why can't they get over the hump? What's missing? What in your estimation is holding this team back? Is it just that they keep running into better teams? Are they just the new St. Louis Blues?
Yes and no, because I think this team should have been able to beat the Lightning. Throughout the whole regular season, they were competitive. They weren't getting... They didn't lose.
They won this division.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know where this, like... They're missing someone... Honestly, they're missing a game breaker. They're missing, like, an actual game breaker. And I'm not saying someone who's skilled or good or just someone who's, like I said, just good. That doesn't make a game breaker. A game breaker is someone... Or a playoff man. They need a playoff man, maybe, is the way to phrase this. They need someone like Jeff Carter, who, for the Penguins, stepped it up in the playoffs and was playing off his ass. Who's doing that on this team during this playoffs? To be honest, Dougie Hamilton looked good, but he wasn't regular season Dougie Hamilton. Where was he? Sebastian Aho had 6 goals, and so it's like, yeah, he has 6 goals, so give it to him in this playoffs, but. Is that really all that many?
I mean, here's the thing, right?
And also, I'm sorry, but it's not like it was on Nedeljkovic. He played well enough for the team, honestly. The team couldn't put up any points.
So, let me ask you this, because this to me is what ultimately ended the series, in my opinion. Game 4.
Bing.
At what point do you pull Mrazek if you're Rod Brind'Amour in Game 4?
Rob and I watched this game live together, and we were sitting there just saying, are they going to pull him? When are they pulling him? I left the room a couple times, and when I came back, I was like, did they pull him yet? And he was like, no. I came back after the second. I figured, all right, maybe they'll let him go from the second period into the third and then pull him. They're only down 2 goals still. They'll have a chance. Nope, didn't care. Just left him in, and...
So after what goal or if you're Rod Brind'Amour, do you end up pulling him? Because I believe when the 4th goal went in, I think that was the tying goal, and it was 4-4 at that point. That's, in my opinion...
Could you pull up... What was that? Was that the one where there was only like a minute or something left in the period?
If I was Rod Brind'Amour... if you guys didn't watch this game, the Lightning started off early with a lead. The Hurricanes went up 2-1, and then if you don't want to let me scroll, there we go. There's the scroll bar. The Lightning went up 1-0. The Hurricanes went up 2-1, and then the Lightning tied at 2-2. Then the Hurricanes went up 4-2, and then the Lightning rattled off 4 unanswered goals.
So, honestly, maybe pull him after the Tyler Johnson goal, which was the tying goal. But I didn't even hate the fact that they left him in until the end of the period. Because I said, leave him until the end of the period, go in the locker room, warm up Nedeljkovic, get him ready for the 3rd period. Don't send him out there just to get maybe sauced on with 3 minutes left in the period. I understand that. But then they just continued to leave him out there. They just didn't care. And they lost the game because of it, because he was shaking. He wasn't tracking the puck well the whole game. The whole game he looked shaky, off. He was making saves, but he made them a lot harder than they needed to be. Or he wasn't really making them. He was scrambling in his crease. It was just bad.
I thought it was a really odd decision to go to Mrazek anyway in Game 3, because the first 2 games were 2-1 games, so it's not on Nedeljkovic at that point, unless you want him to also score goals. I thought it was kind of a bizarre switch to go to Mrazek. Obviously works out in Game 3, they get the win. But Game 4, you could really tell right from puck drop that Mrazek was, and the phrase I like to use is fighting the puck. As a goalie, you don't want to be fighting the puck. As a goalie, you're almost working with the puck essentially a lot of times. When it's gliding into your block, you should be directing it away. You shouldn't be trying to punch at it in a frenzy, just trying to get a block on it. You should be guiding it away, and you should be tracking the puck into the pads for the rebound control. I could tell almost immediately that Mrazek, specifically on his glove side, was really, really fighting it. He was flailing a lot. His movements weren't smooth. It wasn't ready, set, glove to puck. It was ready, set, throw my arm out at the puck, and it just deflects into the corner. He just didn't look like his eyes were where they needed to be, and I didn't like his reaction on really 2 out of the first 4 goals. I'm very surprised they didn't take him out after that. I would have pulled him, honestly, after the 4th goal. I know it's very unconventional. You really don't ever see it, a pulled goalie during a tie game, but I didn't like the way he was playing. And one of Mrazek's strengths is his flexibility, his athleticism, his explosiveness. And we saw him resorting to blocking. He was trying to play blocking style because he was getting beat clean all the time. And when you see a goalie switch up his style mid-game, you know he's in a bad spot mentally. And I honestly would have pulled him after the 4th goal. The Stamkos goal, really wasn't his fault. It's a cross crease to Stamkos, who curls it and rips it home on a power play. But the Kucherov goal was absolutely horrendous, and honestly, that kind of is a nail in the coffin at that point. You go up 6-4 early in the 3rd period, and then the Lightning just park the bus. Very, very, from a coach who's one of the better coaches in the NHL.
I didn't think he was doing matchups very well either during this series.
I mean, I would tend to agree. I just think I don't want this just to sound like I'm just saying the Lightning are a better team, but I think that there are holes in this Hurricanes team, but they're very subtle, and ultimately the question, as we always round out to it, is what do the Hurricanes need to do this offseason? I'll offer my thoughts first this time. I think they just need to make slight upgrades at key positions, The goaltending situation, it's obvious to me that Nedeljkovic is the future here. So one of Mrazek or Reimer is going to go. You probably keep the other one as a safety net sort of situation, because they are veterans at that point. But you just need slight upgrades at certain positions, because if you take certain guys and make them a little bit better, you get a better team. And to the guys that I'm going to point out, it's nothing against you, but the Hurricanes are a team that need to be firing on all cylinders really to compete. And say, for example, you take a guy like Nino Niederreiter off the second line and you replace him with a legitimate, bona fide 30-goal scorer every year. Somebody in the vein of like a Max Pacioretty. Not a superstar, but a guy who's reliable. He's going to get you 30 goals.
He's kind of a superstar for the Knights, but...
I mean, in terms of the league, he really isn't, though. Like, honestly, he's one of the best players on the Knights, but I don't think he's like a superstar. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, Pacioretty's not like... He's a receiver, honestly, on a lot of things. Like, he kind of just benefits from his teammates' play. But, you take a guy like Niederreiter, a goal scorer, replace him with a slightly better goal scorer. Maybe you take a guy like Toivo Teravainen, a playmaker, and you replace him with, like, Nick Backstrom's obviously elite, but a guy like Nick Backstrom, a little bit of a better playmaker who maybe can chip in on the goal side a little bit more. It's just difficult to say because the Hurricanes really do have great players at a lot of positions. They just need to be slightly better at those positions.
I don't even know if they need to be slightly better. I think that they just need to be hungrier in the playoffs. I don't want to say they didn't want it because they played hard. They looked like they were out there wanting it, but no one stepped up is really the best way to put it, it seemed. Like, even Dougie was struggling in games between penalties that were just stupid most of the time, or just turnovers that didn't lead to, like, necessarily them getting scored on, because it didn't, but, like, turnovers that led to bad plays, just bad behind the net passes. He didn't... just like a goaltender, you need your star players, and especially your star defenseman like Dougie, to be not just an S, but an S plus in the playoffs. And an S to an S minus for him is not going to cut it when you need that offensive pressure from him.
I agree. I mean, I do think that there needs to be at least a move made in this offseason, if nothing else, to maybe just change it up a little bit. Because if you bring the same exact team back next year and then the same exact thing happens, you never want to be having the same exact conversation a couple years in a row.
You don't want them to be the Blues, like we were
when you
talking
don't
about.
make any changes.
Or
If they upgrade to, like, let's say for just for argument's sake, it's never gonna happen. But let's say they turn Niederreiter into Max Pacioretty, and then they lose in the second round next year. At least at that point, you can say, okay, it's not the offense. We got to look elsewhere.
This team could just be the Ducks, though.
But the issue is, like, they're young enough that they have a chance to not be the Ducks.
I agree. But the Ducks, we saw them try to make changes. They made moves, and they just ran into the best team every year.
But I don't even want to say that, necessarily they ran into these hot teams that they couldn't have beat, because I legitimately think that they really should have beat the Bruins last year. And they got slapped around by the Bruins last year. I think they lost in 5 or 6. I know they didn't go 7. I know it wasn't a sweep, but they got smacked around by the Bruins last year. And honestly, that Bruins team specifically last year, wasn't really the greatest. They were playing without their starting goaltender. Rask wasn't playing at that point. The Bruins had some guys go out with injuries before that. That team really should have won that series. And honestly, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that they should have won this series, because it is unfortunate that they had to play the Lightning. But to only go 5 games with only 1 game going in overtime, and it was close. Obviously 3 of these 5 games were decided by 1 goal or less.
But I don't even know if they were necessarily that close, because even in those games, Carolina was struggling for some of, like, they just were struggling offensively to put high scoring opportunities up. They were either overcycling or just ripping it on net, and they couldn't find the medium to beat Vasilevsky, which isn't easy to do. Obviously, Vasilevsky's a Vezina candidate without a doubt.
Probably the best goalie in the league, honestly.
Yeah, so throughout a 7-game series, I'm taking him over probably anyone in the league. So
without question.
So it's nothing against the Carolina but Carolina's power play was just.
I mean, that's the other thing, is Carolina had no answers for Tampa Bay Lightning's power play. I mean, I get it. The Lightning's power play is lethal, star-studded. But we saw, in the Montreal series, Montreal started to figure out Toronto's power play after a while and kind of shut them down. You have to make adjustments in order to shut down certain plays, and
that's why I was wondering if it's maybe a coach. And, I don't want to blame the coach, because the regular season, clearly he's doing all the right things. But maybe he just.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't want to, and so I don't want to blame him, but maybe he just made a few wrong calls that led to.
I mean, it's fair to question a coach, because let's be honest here, the regular season doesn't mean shit. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. So
how many coaches do we sit here and go, oh, he's one of the best coaches of all time, but he could never get past the second round in the playoffs? You have to at least
get more out of his players.
And I think ultimately what Carolina needs to do is, just make a shakeup, just get a new piece, get a shiny new upgrade, if nothing else, to kind of kickstart the team and just be like, hey, guys, we're investing in you. This is the time to really start to step up, shake things up a little bit. Don't cut the tree down, but shake the limbs a little bit. And
do you think maybe the problem was that he saw the playoffs and tried to change the system?
I don't think so, because
I'm just
there really wasn't a whole lot of difference between games.
I'm saying
game 56 and the way they were playing in Game 5.
Even offensively, you don't think maybe he said to.
I think the issue is that he didn't change, to be honest with you.
I agree. I was just curious about the other side of the coin.
I think the issue is that, first of all, I think part of the issue is you just, for some reason, throw Mrazek in there after Nedeljkovic only puts up 4 goals in 2 games, and then you get a winning game 3 out of it, barely, and then you lose a pivotal game 4 because Mrazek can't stop a beach ball. And they just didn't adjust. I mean, we've seen it time and time again where coaches stick to their guns, and honestly, part of a good coach in the playoffs is flexibility. And
that's matchups. That's what I was saying. I didn't like Carolina's matchups throughout the series. They kept getting matched up against that their top line kept getting matched up against that third and fourth line, and Pat Maroon was just running through everyone. He was running through Aho and Svechnikov every time he got the chance.
And I don't want to take anything away from what the Lightning did, because obviously the Lightning are a fantastic team. Specifically, a team that a good team finds ways to win. And we saw that in Game 4 when your star goaltender is having a pretty rough game, because honestly Vasilevsky looked really, really rough in that second period specifically. Good teams find a way to win. The Lightning found a way to win, and they are now awaiting the winner of the Bruins-Islanders series. So we'll move on here to that Bruins-Islanders series. We'll save the Avs series for last. Bruins-Islanders Game 6 is, like I said, tonight at 7:30. So if anything we say here is irrelevant, just ignore it. But this has been a really interesting series so far. It's a very odd series because it seems like the teams are just taking turns at, oh, hey, this is going to be the game we play a lot of offense in. Okay, but now we're going to go back to our roots and we're going to play a 2-1 defensive game. Okay, no, but this game, now we're going to score more goals again. It kind of seems like they're almost flip-flopping on the way they want to play. And somehow, despite the fact that the Islanders really don't have an offensive juggernaut, they're managing to win some of these offensive games.
Barzell's coming with exactly what I talked about in the last series. Who needed to step up? Barzell's stepping up.
I think he's got a goal in
past 4 games,
3 or 4 games straight. I know he scored in Game 3. He scored our only goal in Game 3, and he's scored every game since then. So I think he's has either a 3 or 4 game goal scoring streak going, and I mean that's huge for the Islanders, obviously.
That's all they needed, honestly, because getting on the board for them for 1 goal is their biggest problem, honestly. That first goal for them is the biggest hump.
And yet, despite that fact, I think we've only scored the first goal once this whole series. It's kind of odd in a lot of ways because our record after we give up the first goal isn't great, all things considered. I think our regular season record was like below 500 when we give up the first goal. And yet, despite the fact that Varlamov has allowed a goal in the first 3 shots in his last 5 starts, just like I was saying with the Lightning, good teams find a way to win. I mean, you can call it whatever you want, and I've seen a lot of crap and a lot of nonsense coming out from the Boston Bruins organization, from Bruce Cassidy and the Bruins fans. Call it whatever you want. If you want to sit there in ignorance and call it luck, you can call it that, but you're wrong. If you want to sit there in ignorance and call it the refs, you can call it that, but you're wrong. The Islanders were the 30th in terms of penalties, we were the 30th team in the league. There was only 1 team that took less penalties than us this year. So why is Bruce Cassidy surprised that we're not taking penalties? The Islanders are one of the most disciplined teams in the National Hockey League.
My biggest question about why he's saying that is what you were talking about earlier, was switching up his game plan. It almost feels like he's a boxer right now, and he doesn't know if he wants to go southpaw or just regular fighting stance. So he's switching between the two, and whatever's working at that moment he's going with, and then he just keeps flopping between them. And I don't think them playing the Islanders game, which is what they've been trying to do, is smart. They're playing physical, and they're getting penalties. Yes, you are getting penalties because of it. When you try to match a team who plays a disciplined physical game versus your team trying to play some half physical, overdrive physical now, the Bruins are a half physical team, I would say. They have a decent size. They're hitting constantly up against in the boards, but they're not. That's not how they win games. They don't win games off their forecheck and their hitting. They win games off their goal scorers making plays and these excellent just players using opportunities like Pasta and Marchand, and they're excellent just not depth, but back check and forecheck is really what it is. Their movement with the puck is very good. But so going up against the Islanders, who are just gonna try and wither you down physically, but in a disciplined manner, and even if it's not always disciplined, they're within the they're playing within the realms of what the refs are setting. The refs set the tone of the game for what a rough is, for what a slash is, for everything. And if you can't read that as a team, then you're not going to do well, which is what the Bruins are doing. They're not reading it well. They're just running guys, just trying to take every hit, every little whack, and they're being faulted because of it. Given, I think the refs have been garbage this series. I think they've been garbage all around, though. I'm seeing blown calls on both sides. It's not like one over the other. Like, it's... Are there obvious blown calls that, like, the one on Pajot? Yes, but did they also let one go against him? Yes. So, it's like... Or did they get him after they let one go? Yes. So, I don't see what these people are complaining about. I think it's a pretty fair called series for how bad the refs are in general this playoffs. But these refs are not anywhere near as bad as that Montreal-Toronto series, and no one complained in that one.
It's just weird that Bruce Cassidy, who honestly, he's a great coach. I don't know why he's resorting to these tactics. I mean, Bruins fans are going to point out about what Barry Trotz said about Patrice Bergeron. All that Barry Trotz said is that Patrice Bergeron cheats on faceoffs. The whole league knows that. He's one of the best cheaters on faceoffs in the league. That's why he's so good at it. Everybody cheats on faceoffs. Everyone
says Sid is a huge cheat, but like
Barry Trotz didn't come out and say, "Oh, Bergeron's garbage and he only wins his faceoffs because he cheats." He just said, "Yeah, They asked him like, "Why are you losing all these faceoffs to Bergeron?" He's like, "Because he's a good cheater." And it's the worst kept secret in the NHL that everyone cheats on faceoffs.
And not even that. What are you supposed to say? Oh, my guy's just bad at faceoffs? No. Like, you obviously say the other guy's just, he's on the money with his jumps, because that's really what it is.
So, I don't know why Bruce Cassidy got a bee in his bonnet. It's a very odd thing for him to say that the penalties were lopsided, because before Game 5, the Bruins had only had 2 extra penalties called on them that the Islanders didn't. Like, the Bruins had 2 more penalties called on them than the Islanders, it was 4, actually. So you're averaging 1 extra penalty a game, which, hey, guess what? The Bruins, I think, were like the 10th most penalized team in the NHL in the regular season. And again, not to beat the dead horse, the Islanders were the 30th most penalized team in the NHL. Why are you surprised that your team that averages 10 penalty minutes a game is getting the extra 2 minutes every game? Because you guys take penalties.
And did anyone watch Marchand in the last series? What do you have, 7 penalties? 9 penalties, something like that last series from Marchand alone?
Which, by the way, I noticed that Bruce Cassidy was very, very quiet on the fact that 4 of his players have been fined in this series. David Krejci got fined for the spear on Matt Barzal. Somebody else got fined for a high stick, I forget who. And then Nick Ritchie got fined for elbowing Scott Mayfield in the head.
There was one other fine, I think it was 4.
Yeah. Those are the only 3 I can call off the top of my head. But did he watch the film of Brett Ritchie elbowing Scott Mayfield in the head? I mean, I'm sure he did, and he probably just turned a blind eye to it. So this is a whole aside to the whole series, but it's just such a stupid comment from a coach who really is better than that. He really honestly is. But back to my original point, you can call it luck if you want. You can call it the refs if you want. You're wrong on both of those. Good teams find a way to win hockey games. This series isn't over. The Bruins are a good team. It would not surprise me at all if they come back and win this in 7. But what they have to focus on is how they're playing. Because right now, it sounds like to me the entire Bruins franchise is so concerned with the refs and so concerned with how the Islanders are playing that they're not following their own game. The Bruins game should be to offensively dominate the Islanders. And quite honestly, the top 2 lines of the Bruins have been. The Islanders have no answer for the Taylor Hall line. They've had no answer for the Patrice Bergeron line. The Bruins' problem is, what we've said all year, they had zero depth. They're getting nothing out of their bottom six on their forwards. They're getting nothing out of any of their defensemen who's not named Charlie McAvoy and Matt Grzelcyk. They've gotten nothing from their depth. So maybe Bruce Cassidy needs to focus on getting some production out of his bottom six instead of worrying about if the refs are going to call an extra penalty on them or not. Because that, to me, it's a bad look. And honestly, if you're a player, it's probably going to affect you mentally when you know that your coach is hyper concerned with the penalties. Maybe you don't play as hard because you don't want to take that extra penalty. Or, honestly, you're not focused on the game at all. You're just waiting for the next penalty call so you can complain about it. It just takes away your mental game from the game at hand, and that's honestly such a huge detriment to your team.
When I worked at the rink, one of the worst things I thought I always saw was coaches who actively badmouth the refs on the bench. It's just, while you build toxicity up. You're building up a toxic, just flow of energy on the bench at that point, where every time the ref messes up a call, the players are all going to throw their arms up. They're going to get in a pissy fit. They're going to be just agitated the whole time. They're going to be, every time their buddy gets run, they're going to be throwing their hands up, where's our call? Or if their buddy runs someone, they're going to sit there and wait for the call to be had, and their mind's just going to be distracted. It's just not the way to be. And I understand if you legitimately felt the need to come out that the refs were not saying something, that they were not doing their job. If either the Montreal Canadiens or the Toronto Maple Leafs in their last series said that, I would not have cared. If the Tampa Bay Lightning or the Panthers this year said it in their series, I wouldn't have cared. If even the Islanders in their last series said it, I wouldn't have cared. Or the other team they played.
Penguins?
Yeah, or if the Penguins said it, I wouldn't have been that caring because the refs were very bad in those series. This series, they really haven't been that awful. If I understand he's coaching, he's not watching the rest of the league, but aren't you, as a coach, supposed to be watching footage of the other teams? Are you not watching the penalties from other games? Are you paying attention to box scores at all?
It's just a very, very weird move from a veteran coach of a veteran hockey team to all of a sudden pick now to start complaining about the refs when, like I said, it distracts your team from the game. I mean, and bottom line, let's be honest here, it's not like the refs are handing a top 10 power play a power play. The Islanders' power play, for all intents and purposes, is pretty bad. So maybe you don't complain about the refs. Maybe you tell your penalty killers, hey, maybe we shouldn't go 1 for 4 on the PK today and lose the game. Because the Islanders in Game 5 went 3 for 4. The refs can call all the penalties they want. If you're killing the penalties, it doesn't matter. And maybe that's what they should be focusing on.
That's the thing. It's not like these games were decided on a game. If they lost Game 2 and 3, well, they won Game 3. If they lose Game 2 and 3 in overtime to a bad call, and then in Game 4 and 5 he doesn't like what the refs are doing, he thinks they're doing a bad job, I can maybe see his point. If they had been blowing major calls all series, or even if they blew just one major call that blew one game, I believe that the penalty on Uyghur in that Tampa Bay Florida game early in the series, when they scored on a penalty, but it blew the game. I thought it was a shit call, and it blew that game. So if the Florida Panthers wanted to come out and say the refs have sucked all series since that call, I love that NHL players, and I said this earlier when we were talking about the Tom Wilson thing, I wish that players and coaches and individuals throughout the league had bigger voices and more backlash at the organization that they play for if they don't like things. I wish that the players union would be better at their job and would give their players a voice, and because while you should be fined for something like this, and in any league you'd be fined, I like this backlash. Not in this scenario. I think he's wrong, but I like the idea of what he did.
It's just, like I said, it's just not the time. I mean, and the other issue is, like I said, case in point, Game 3, the Islanders have a power play late. I think they have a power play with 3 minutes to go in the game, right? Tied 1-1. The Bruins kill it off, and then they win in overtime. I noticed that he didn't have anything negative to say after that game. It was only after the Bruins lost. And if this is supposed to be some weird motivational tactic,
he's being a sore loser, honestly.
It's a very bizarre move from a coach that honestly is better than that. And so, Game 6 is tonight. We'll see what happens. Could be going to Game 7, or the Islanders could be going on to face the Tampa Bay Lightning. Obviously, when this series wraps up, during our next week's podcast, we will wrap up this series. But my prediction, I think that the Islanders win in Game 7. I think the Bruins force a Game 7 tonight. And then I think the Islanders are able to pull out the series. Despite what my bracket says, I do have the Bruins going to the semifinals in my bracket, but I think just based on the way this series is going and based on the fact that Bruce Cassidy does not seem to be focused on the task at hand, I don't like that from the Bruins, and I think that that's just a bad sign. So who knows? The Bruins could still very well win the series. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me at all. Like I said, I did pick them to win the series in my bracket, so if the Bruins come back and win the series, good for them. But Bruce Cassidy really needs to reevaluate where his head's at, especially going into a semifinal matchup with the Lightning. You can't be half-assing that matchup. So we'll go on to the final series, second-round series. The Vegas Golden Knights, with a comeback win last night, they've won 3 in a row. They're now up 3-2 on the Avalanche, going home to Vegas. And I don't know about you, but I think that this series is really exposing something that I've been saying all year. And have you noticed that every time the Knights get into the zone, that the Avalanche defenders are quite literally just bouncing off of them? Like, they can't, like, the Avs defenders are having
bouncing or just getting skate past. It's constant 2-on-1s.
It's kind of crazy because, like, last night's game specifically, the Avalanche did a really, really good job at shutting down the rush. But the problem is when the puck got into the zone, they were just getting, like, destroyed, and even the guys that aren't super big, but guys like Mark Stone, Max Pacioretty, some of the heftier players on the Knights, the Avs defenders can't check them off the puck. And that's something that I've said since the beginning of the year. I said I don't like the size of this roster. I think we even looked at the size of this roster, and really most of the defensemen outside of Ryan Graves and Eric Johnson really aren't that big of dudes.
And Ryan Graves doesn't even play that big of a game.
So it's just, I think that really, to me, that's the biggest difference in Games 1 and 2 and Games 3, 4, and 5. Games 1 and 2, the Avalanche were able to use their legs, outskate the forecheck of the Knights, and get the puck into the zone. Games 3, 4, and 5, I think the Knights sat back and said, well, wait a minute. We're just so much bigger than them. I'm just going to dump the puck in the corner, and they're not going to check Mark Stone off the puck because guess what? Cale Makar is only like 5'10", 180. Like, he's not checking anybody off the puck.
He's struggling severely in his defensive zone. While he's getting it out, and every time he gets it out, though, he has to fight to get it out. Not everything should be a fight to get out. Like, the guy should bounce off you. If you're in the corner, he bounces off you. You, generally speaking, this is how it goes. He bounces off you. You turn it out. You dump it out, and then the play cycles down when it's a 1-on-3 in your defensive zone. So, but he's not able to do that for some reason right now because he's not big enough. They're not bouncing off him. They're bodying him.
I just think that the Avs are really, really feeling the ill effects of having an undersized defensive core. I mean, their forwards, like, we looked at their forwards today. Their forwards are pretty big. Mm-hmm. Like, even guys like Landy and Moose are pretty big guys. And we're seeing that the Knights' bigger, heavier defense is able to keep them off the score sheet because they're just as big. Meanwhile, the Avs defensemen can't contain guys like Max Pacioretty or Mark Stone because they're just flying off them every time they touch the puck.
From what this is where we go back to with adjustments. Pete DeBoer over there, veteran coach, been here before, been in the playoffs, knows what to do. He said, "Okay, we're getting just because the reason that they lost game 1 and 2 was really all because of Avalanche rushes. It was Nathan McKinnon and Rantanen just out, like, blowing into the zone and out skating people. And just out skating the defenseman. So he said, okay, simple plan. Drop the defenseman back, bring the center back, play a 3-man defensive lead, play dump in the corner. They can't take us off the puck when it's in the corner. let everyone charge in on a late rush, have a late defensive back just in case they dump it out, and just play a defensive game and use offensive opportunities to score. And then when it's in the zone, just keep it there. Because, as you said, they can't get it out. They have no size. They don't have an answer.
It's funny because the Avalanche defensemen, I think, relatively speaking, through the series, have been pretty good at limiting the chances on the rush. And when there is an odd man rush, they're quick enough to get back. But as with any series, you're not going to completely shut down the rush of any team. So, like we did see last night, a couple of goals off the rush for the Knights, because at some point you're just going to give up a shot. And part of that also might be because by the time this game gets to the third period, gets to overtime, the Avalanche defensemen are exhausted because they've been banged around for 60 minutes by guys that are bigger than them.
Not even that. When Mark Stone and Carlson come down and they get 5, 6, 7 rushes a game, they're going to see Grubauer's holes eventually. They're going to eventually see a hole in one of those rushes, or they're going to see what he's doing and make the different move. They're going to adjust properly. They're not just going to let Grubauer keep making the same saves over and over again.
I don't even think the rush is really the thing that the Avs need to worry about. Specifically...
Well, the rush leads to just the pressure, like the puck in the zone.
Yeah, well, I'm saying like they've actually done a pretty relatively good job, I think, this series of limiting that. But it's just the issue is like when we get to the later stages, you start to see it fall apart. Like I think really through the first 2 periods, the Avs didn't give up any odd man rushes last night, and then you saw in the third period the defensemen were slower. They were getting their legs were starting to drag a little bit. The game opens up a little bit, and the Knights find a couple rushes and get in the zone. You know. If we're talking adjustments, I think the adjustment that needs to be made from the Avalanche side of things is the passes have to be faster, because you cannot let the Knights forechecker get on you, because you're not going to win that puck battle most of the time. Guys like Cale Makar, not Ryan Graves, the other one, the younger guy that plays with Cale Makar. I should know this because Steve tried to trade me him. Sammy Girard. Cale Makar, Sam Girard, Devon Tays. These guys aren't very big, honestly.
Devon Tays has also looked very spotty in the offensive zone these past few games.
You know, and it's just an issue of they don't have the size on the back end. And so what do you have? These guys can flat out fucking skate. So you have to get a quick up. You can't sit back there and try to set up a play. I think every time that puck gets something in the zone for the Avalanche, they should be looking to break out immediately. Don't take it behind your net. Don't wait up for a setup play. Don't wait for the set breakout. Get that puck out of your zone as soon as you can, because you are significantly faster. I mean, even guys that we don't really think are particularly super fast, like Alex Newhook, are flying past Alex Pietrangelo when they're entering the zone. You have to use that to your advantage. You can't wait. I don't care how pretty your passing play is going to be at the blue line if you set it up. Get that puck out of your zone, because you can't get it out once the Knights are on you. And they might not score a lot of goals from that offensive pressure, but what that does is later in the games, you take a couple checks, you're not skating as fast. Now you're playing the Knights game, and you can't. You just flat out can't. And, you know, nothing against Grubauer. I think he's been good enough. I mean, Fleury had an absolutely horrendous first goal. I don't know what the hell that was last night.
That across the arm, like, glove.
Which that's rule 1 as a goaltender. You never reach across yourself.
Yeah.
But, you know, Fleury, for all intents and purposes, bounced back pretty well. He had a really good rest of the game. But the Avs just are feeling the pressure of the Knights' forecheck, and they're not handling it very well. And I think that they need to make a serious adjustment. I still believe that the Avalanche will win this series. And the reason that I believe that is I think if the Avs can use their speed, the Knights just can't keep up. I think if they make that adjustment and Jared Bednar says, hey, boys, no more set plays. That puck comes in our zone, we're getting it out. Throw it up the middle. Chip it in. Just whatever you do, get it out of our zone. I think if they make that adjustment and you start to force the Knights to come 200 feet every time, you're going to beat them in that foot race back to their own blue line. I think if they make that one small adjustment...
They're going to get tired too, playing that forechecking game constantly.
Well, that's the other thing, is if this goes 7, honestly, the youth of the Avalanche is going to give them an advantage, because they're younger than the Knights at almost every position.
And the Knights also had a 7-game series in their last one, too.
So, if I was a betting man, if you asked me, hey, who's going to win this series, I still believe that the Avs are going to win this series. But they're definitely not adjusting very well, and I think that Jared Bednar needs to make that audible call now because guess what? You don't have any more runway. You're out. The plane's about to take off, and if you're not on it, you're going home. So, I guess you're staying home, but I don't know. It's been an interesting series. Winner of this, like I said, will play Montreal. The winner of the Islanders Boston series will play the Tampa Bay Lightning, and we will have our semifinal matchups at that point. So, is there any final things you wanted to talk about the second round so far, or anything, I guess, just in general?
I'd like to touch on Mark Scheifele a bit, and I just literally just now got sent his post game interview of the last series or just press conference interview talking about the suspension, and he essentially said that it was his fault that he put himself in that position, that he should have back checked faster, and he let his team down in the scenario overall. And while I agree with that, I would have loved to have seen some He said it's whatever. It just is what it is from the league. Would have loved to have seen a little more backlash from him. Honestly, I would have While I understand the call, and it wouldn't have made a difference, they got swept. But it's a real kick in the ass knowing that your top offensive player is not coming back for the series from a team perspective for the whole series, and he might not be back for the next series either, depending on when it ends. It's just you go back and you can watch Connor McDavid elbow that whoever it was in the head.
It's Kakaniemi.
Kakaniemi, yeah. You can watch him literally elbow him in the head, and no one in the NHL said anything about that when it happened, really. It kind of just got swept under the rug. Would really love to see some backlash about Peros from other people in the NHL right now, especially someone who is in a position to say something. But
I'm going to disagree with you on that point, only just because it really wasn't a borderline play, I don't think. Like, I mean, me, you, and Steve sat there, and I said he should only get like 2 games, maybe a game. But the fact of the matter is, if it was a more borderline play, I would agree. But he knows it was a bad hit. And I actually kind of like him owning up to it in a sense that how much we've talked about Alex Ovechkin this year and his lack of ownership for the things that he's done. I do think it sets a good example for the younger players, for Scheifele to say, look, that's on me. But to your point, I don't know if you saw, he did kind of give a little shot at the league because he said, I thought it was going to be Philip Deneau trying to shut me down this series, but instead the NHL shut me down. So he did give a little bit of a poke at the NHL and kind of indicate that he wasn't thrilled with the length of the suspension. While I'm all for like just dunking on George Peros whenever you can, because like he's done an absolutely awful job this year, I do respect Scheifele for owning it and saying like, look, like it was stupid.
I agree. He needs to apologize to the team 100%, or he did rather. I think that he definitely should do that because it was stupid. I think it was a suspendable offense, to be honest. I don't think it was 7 games worth or whatever he got.
I think 5, because I think he has 1 more next year. 4 or 5. He got 4 or 5 for it, I think.
Yeah, so I agree. I like that he owned up to it. I like that he is setting a good example for his teammates, but I also, just as I said this whole season, and as I just said a minute ago, would love to see a little more voice from some of these players.
It's going to be interesting, especially next year when we have the entire league playing again, and that includes guys like, at that point, Nazem Kadri and Tom Wilson. we'll see if the league starts to crack down on them a little bit harder, and especially with how much scrutiny there has been this year over the Department of Player Safety, we'll see if they do start to take notice of the quote-unquote superstars getting away with things they really shouldn't. So that's going to wrap up this week's episode. Next week, by this weekend, all these series are going to be wrapped up. So by the time we're doing the episode next week, the third round series will definitely have started. But just keep an ear out. We're going to do, as there's less and less series to wrap up, we're going to, be able to talk about them a little bit more at length. So next week, we're going to wrap up the Islanders Bruins series and the Avalanche Knights series, and then we'll start talking about the ongoing third round series at that point between the Canadiens and whoever wins Vegas, Colorado, and the Lightning and whoever wins Boston, New York. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys again next time.